The air inside the auction house smelled of dust, old money, and secrets. Jamal Carter adjusted his tie, scanning the crowd gathered in the dimly lit hall of Calloway and Sons auction house. He had driven 3 hours from Atlanta to this small Georgia town, chasing a lead on rare historical documents, letters, ledgers, or even forgotten slave narratives that belonged in a museum, not in the private collections of men who wanted to forget their history. Most of the attendees were white, dressed in their country club casual, pressed khakis, polo shirts, pearls and diamonds that caught the light just right. Jamal had been in these spaces before, but there was always that moment. The moment when someone's eyes lingered a beat too long, sizing him up like he didn't belong. Didn't matter. He was here for one thing. The auctioneer, Richard Calloway, stood on the raised platform, his voice smooth as bourbon. Up next, a rather interesting piece. A handwritten journal from the 1800s discovered on the grounds of the Calloway estate. Jamal leaned forward. His breath caught as a clerk carefully placed the leather-bound book on a display stand. The pages were yellowed, edges curled with time. But Jamal knew what he was looking at. This wasn't just any journal. This was the kind of record that could rewrite history. "Bidding starts at $500, Calloway announced. Jamal's hand shot up. Murmurs rippled through the room. A few heads turned. Calloway's gaze locked onto Jamal. Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of something unreadable, but unmistakable. "Do I have 600? Calloway called. An older man in the front row lazily lifted his paddle. Jamal didn't hesitate. 700. Calloway's mouth twitched. His fingers tapped against the podium. He hesitated, just a second too long, before calling out, 800. The room had gone quiet. The other bidder, a man in a navy blazer, shook his head and lowered his paddle. Jamal exhaled. 900, he said, steady. The hammer was about to drop. But then, "We're pulling the item," Calloway said abruptly. A stunned silence filled the room. Jamal's brows furrowed. "Excuse me?" Calloway cleared his throat. "I've just been informed this item is not for sale after all. Apologies for the inconvenience." Jamal shot to his feet. "You just put it up for auction. I won the bid." Calloway's gaze darkened. "I said the item is no longer available." Tension crackled in the air. Jamal felt every pair of eyes on him. He knew what this was. This wasn't about money. This was about control, about who had the right to own history. And Calloway had just made it very clear. Jamal wasn't supposed to. But that was the mistake. Because now, he wasn't leaving without that book, even if he had to uncover what Calloway was so desperate to keep buried. 2. Jamal's pulse pounded in his ears. The murmur of the crowd swelled as whispers slithered from one end of the auction house to the other. Some people glanced at him with mild curiosity. Others didn't bother to hide their disdain. He could hear it in the shift of their voices, the amusement in their smirks. Who does he think he is? Richard Calloway, still standing behind the podium, cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be moving on to the next item." "Not so fast," Jamal cut in, his voice carrying through the hall. The crowd fell into a hushed silence. Jamal stepped forward, his hands steady, his face calm, but his body buzzing with heat. "You put the journal up for sale. I placed the highest bid. If there's an issue with the item, I'd like to hear the reason from you directly." Calloway's eyes narrowed, his polite mask slipping just enough to reveal the impatience beneath. "Sir, the decision has been made. The auction house has the right to withdraw any item at any time. That right wasn't exercised until I made the final bid." A few uncomfortable coughs echoed in the back. The well-dressed man who had bid before him shifted in his seat, suddenly finding his watch very interesting. Calloway's fingers drummed against the podium. "It's not available for purchase," he repeated, his voice firm. Jamal didn't back down. Then why was it up for sale at all? The auctioneer opened his mouth, but before he could speak, a woman's voice rang out from the side of the room. "Richard, what's going on?" Jamal turned to see a woman in her 60s standing near a side entrance, her pearl necklace resting neatly on the collar of her lavender dress. Her posture was stiff, disapproving, but her eyes, sharp and calculating, were locked on Calloway. The auctioneer stiffened. "Nothing, Eleanor." Eleanor, Eleanor Calloway. Jamal recognized the name instantly. The matriarch of the Calloway family, the same family that once owned one of the largest plantations in this county. If the journal had come from their estate, there was no telling what was inside it. She walked briskly to the podium, lowering her voice just enough that only those closest could hear. "Why wasn't this handled before the auction started?" she hissed. "I didn't know," Calloway muttered back. "Then you should have." Her gaze flickered toward Jamal before settling back on her son. "Fix it." Jamal took a step closer. "So that's how it is? You saw who was about to take the journal home, and now it's a problem?" Eleanor turned to him, her expression unreadable. "This is private property, young man." "Not anymore," Jamal countered. "It was up for auction. That makes it public." She smiled then, the kind of smile that wasn't meant to be kind, the kind meant to remind someone exactly where they stood. "This is our history," she said smoothly. Jamal felt his jaw tighten. "And history belongs to everyone." Eleanor gave a small, knowing sigh, as if she had expected this argument all along. She turned to Calloway. "Refund his bid and close the sale." The tension in the room thickened, pressing in from all sides. Jamal wasn't about to win this here, not now. But that journal, whatever it contained, it was valuable. And the Calloways were determined to keep it out of his hands, which only made him more certain of one thing. He had to get that book, even if it meant breaking the rules. Jamal sat in his car outside Calloway and Sons auction house, his fingers drumming restlessly against the steering wheel. The journal was still inside. He knew it. After the heated exchange with Eleanor Calloway, the auction had resumed like nothing had happened. Business as usual. Jamal had left quietly, knowing there was no way they'd let him near that book, not in front of all those people. But now? The auction house was closed for the night. The parking lot was empty, the only lights coming from a dim street lamp and a flickering neon "closed" sign in the window. Jamal had spent years studying historical records, digging through archives in dusty libraries, piecing together stories that had been erased, rewritten, or hidden. This wasn't just about the book anymore. It was about whatever was inside it. Something the Calloways didn't want him to see, and that meant he had to see it. He took a deep breath, checking his surroundings. The street was quiet, the town winding down for the night. He pulled a black hoodie over his head, grabbed his phone, and stepped out of the car. The front door was locked. No surprise there, but Jamal had already scouted the side entrance earlier, a rusted old door near the back alley, probably used for deliveries. He walked toward it, keeping his footsteps light. His heart pounded, but his hands were steady. He wasn't a criminal, but sometimes history required a little bending of the rules. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a slim black case. Inside was a set of lock-picking tools, a gift from his cousin Marcus, who worked in private security and had insisted Jamal learn just in case. "Guess this is my case." He crouched near the door, inserting the tools into the lock. The tumblers were old, stiff. He worked carefully, listening for the telltale clicks. 1, 2, 3. A soft snick, and the door creaked open an inch. Jamal exhaled, then slipped inside. Inside, the auction house was eerily quiet. The scent of polished wood and aged paper filled the air. The main showroom was empty now, the podium where Calloway had stood earlier looming in the darkness. Jamal moved carefully, his sneakers barely making a sound against the hardwood floor. He had watched where the auction assistants had taken the items after they were sold, through a set of double doors near the back of the room. That's where the journal would be. He crept forward, easing one of the doors open. Inside was a small office, lined with shelves filled with antique books, jewelry boxes, and other valuables waiting to be cataloged. A large wooden desk sat in the center, papers strewn across the surface. And there, sitting atop a stack of documents, the journal. Jamal's fingers tingled as he reached for it. The leather was cracked with age, the pages thick beneath his fingertips. He opened it carefully, his eyes scanning the first few lines. July 14th, 1856. I must write down what I have seen today, lest it be forgotten in the years to come. Jamal's pulse quickened. He flipped to the middle of the journal, scanning for anything significant. A few pages in, his breath caught. A boy, no older than 12. They took him from the quarters today. Said he had been caught reading. Master was furious. Said he would make an example of him. Jamal's stomach twisted. His hands clenched around the journal. This wasn't just a historical record. This was testimony, proof, a noise. Jamal's head snapped up. Footsteps, heavy ones, coming down the hall. Shit. He shut the journal, tucking it into the inside pocket of his hoodie. His eyes darted around the room. No back door, nowhere to hide. The footsteps grew louder. Then, the door handle turned. Jamal, S heart raced as the door swung open. He barely had time to react before a figure stepped into the office, his silhouette sharp against the dim light from the hallway. It was Richard Calloway. The auctioneer's eyes locked onto Jamal, widening for a brief moment before narrowing in recognition. You. Jamal froze, his hand gripping the journal inside his hoodie. His breath quickened, but he fought to keep his voice steady. Calloway's lips curled into a tight, controlled smile, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of irritation. I'm afraid you've made a grave mistake. He took a step forward, his voice lowering, colder. This isn't how things are done, Mr. Carter. Jamal's mind raced. He needed to think fast. I don't know what you're talking about. He glanced toward the hallway, but it was a dead end. He was trapped. Calloway tilted his head, studying him, then took another slow step forward. Do you think this, he motioned toward the journal, was just some random relic we were selling off? You think we'd let it go to someone like you? Jamal's eyes narrowed, his heart pounding in his chest. Let me guess. You don't want anyone else knowing what's inside this, do you? Calloway's jaw tightened, his hand reaching into his pocket. Jamal's instinct screamed that he was about to pull out a weapon, but instead, Calloway produced a set of keys and tossed them onto the desk. You've gone far enough. I'll let you walk out of here if you leave it all behind. The journal, the history, everything. Jamal didn't move. He could feel his muscles tightening, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. The journal was proof. But what kind of proof was it? If it revealed the truth about the Calloways' plantation, about the families that had benefited from centuries of bloodshed, it could send shockwaves through the town. Would it be worth it to expose it all? You know what's inside it, don't you? Calloway's voice softened, just a bit, as if he was trying to appeal to Jamal's better nature. I didn't want it to be like this. I didn't want to protect the past. But it's too dangerous for someone like you to know. People will lose everything. Jamal's mind was still reeling, the weight of those words sinking into him. People will lose everything. What did that mean? What would happen if he exposed it all? Was he ready to take that risk? The silence between them stretched long and tight, broken only by the distant hum of traffic outside. I didn't come here to destroy anyone, Jamal finally said, his voice steady. I came here to learn the truth. I came here to give people back what was taken from them. Calloway's face darkened, his features hardening into something dangerous. You're too naive to understand. Jamal stood taller. Maybe, but the truth is always worth fighting for. And this, he held up the journal, this can't stay hidden. For a split second, something flickered behind Calloway's eyes. Then he stepped forward, fast. But Jamal was ready. He darted to the side, grabbing the journal from his hoodie and taking a step back. Calloway lunged again, his hand shooting out. You're making a mistake! But Jamal was quicker. He slammed the journal onto the desk between them, his fingers trembling as he slid it away from Calloway's grasp. His breath was shallow, but his resolve was clear. I'm taking it. Jamal's voice was quiet but unyielding. You're not stopping me. Calloway stood there for a moment, eyes blazing, but then something shifted. A slow, deliberate exhale, a nod almost too subtle to notice. Fine, he said, his voice lower now, almost eerily calm. You want the truth? It'll cost you more than you think. Jamal felt a chill run down his spine, but he refused to back down. He picked up the journal, holding it close to his chest. I'll pay the price, whatever it takes. As he turned to walk toward the door, he felt Calloway's gaze bore into him. It wasn't just anger anymore, it was something darker. When Jamal stepped outside, the cool night air hit him like a slap. He didn't feel victorious. He felt exposed, vulnerable. The journal was only a part of the story, but it was a story that needed to be told, no matter the cost. The shadows in the auction house still felt like they were chasing him, pressing in. But Jamal pushed forward. He didn't know what the future held, what kind of danger he'd brought upon himself, but the truth had to come out. It had to, and he would make sure of it.